It is now the fall, and we're out on the Alvord Desert, hoping to do a few things and see a few things. We brought the Honda along because this area is so vast, you'd never get over it all on foot. So we're going to take to the Honda and look around a little bit and see what we can see. The first thing Marge wants to do is get on the Honda and ride up to the orchard and see if some of that wonderful fruit is ripe. It's grown up here. It was planted by the old miners, Mike and Jim Weston, on the site where they lived while they were mining mercury out of the Steens Mountains. It was mostly during World War II they were working the mercury mines. I remember the two old guys, I'd see them come down and check their mail down at the main road, and they'd walk down and check it. We get up to the orchard and see there's a bunch of fruit on the ground, and oh boy, the peaches are just perfectly ripe. And these are the nicest peaches you've ever eaten. They're good, sweet, Red Haven peaches, I believe is what they are, and they're reseeding themselves. And they have no fertilizer or spray or chemicals on them. They're just the pure, natural fruit, which is what we're looking for. There's a bumper crop of apples on the apple tree. There's all sorts of fruit around at this orchard. There's peaches and plums and pears and cherries, all planted by the old miners. And since this is more of a microclimate from the hot springs, there's fruit that grows up here that shouldn't grow at this elevation because they would freeze out in the winter, but with the microclimate they don't seem to, and it's in a protected area. Looks like Marge has all the fruit.
Well, that's all that bucket's going to hold. They'll bounce off.
I'll have to leave the rest in my pocket.
Yeah. There's the orchard waving in the breeze with the Alvord Desert in the background. We can get an idea of the vastness of the Alvord Desert as it is laid out in front of us here. There's somewhere between 1 and 200 square miles of this. And many people use this for different recreational purposes, like riding motorcycles, flying airplanes and landing there. It's even listed as an alternate site for landing space vehicles like the space shuttle. The next morning, at the very first light, I'm up and ready to go for a hike up on the Steens Mountain. The first wildlife I see is this rubber boa. They're called the two-headed snake, and I see the reason for this. When he senses danger of any kind, he quickly coils, tucking his head completely underneath him where it'll be safe. Then that tail comes up, and it has what looks to be a head. Actually, it's an artificial head on the end of his tail, and he'll intimidate you with that if he can. He'll even strike with it. I pestered him a little bit with my hat, and he'd actually strike the hat and sort of hang on a little with a little barb on the end of the tail. I guess a person, if he struck you with that, might think you've been snake bitten, but it's all just intimidation. This tiny, slow little snake's main food is small mammals and lizards and things like that he can catch.
When he strikes, it's not with his head, it's with his tail. And since he doesn't even have a mouth on his tail, he's not going to do much. There's just kind of a little barb on the end of his tail that he can hang on a little bit. I guess it's to make that intimidation look more real. He's a real beauty of a little snake. Pretty little pattern of scales and shiny and pretty in the first light of the morning.
A great horned owl sits perched low on the limb of a juniper tree with all his wisdom, and he's blinking his eye and checking me out with those great huge green eyes. He comes alive come nightfall. My eye caught sight of something right on top of the mountain. After closer examination, I see it's a pair of bighorn sheep. It's a ewe and a very young ram standing right on the summit of this peak for the whole world to see, with a stormy sky in the background. I think these sheep were in the rut at the time I was there, because I could see where they'd been scuffling and shoving around on the trail down below.
They're keeping the all-important eye on me as they stand on.
I've hiked up here on top. Right over here is Pike Creek, and there's the summit of the Steens Mountains. Fish Lake's probably right up there. And all I've seen so far is a rubber boa, 2 mountain sheep, and a great horned owl.
It looks like I'm up on top of the world here on this peak in the Steens Mountains. I can look around and see more peaks around me, but seeing those mountain sheep just energizes you. I can't think of a better feeling. I find this old juniper tree, which has to be hundreds and hundreds of years old, standing alone. I finish my journey coming down the mountain just as the moon majestically rises over the Alvord Desert. It's awesome to see the moon come over the desert and shine in some of the pools from the hot springs. But this is going to be a short night. The next morning, before it was even daylight, I saw a set of headlights coming up the road. Here's Carl. We talked about this earlier. We were going up to the orchard and pick some peaches for Carl, and Marge is going to take 'em home and can 'em for him and bring 'em back to him the next trip over, or send 'em with someone. Carl tells a few stories while we're waiting for Marge to get ready. Then we're up at the... As soon as it's light enough, we're up at the orchard picking peaches. Carl says you always should do those things early of a morning, and it looks like we'd have had a hard time being much earlier here and being able to see the peaches, but we'll get him enough to can right here in a few minutes. After we pick enough peaches for Carl, it's time to take to our Honda and head out across the playa of the Alvord Desert. We're going to go explore the north end of it. I really haven't been out there much, and we'll go see what there is on the north end of the playa. Mile after mile, the wheels turn, breaking up some of the rough edges of the playa as we head northward. We're going clear to the north end. We see a jackrabbit. Marge is driving and chases the rabbit a little bit, but he made his getaway in a few jumps. An old cow met her ill fate right here on the Alvord Desert, and her bones are bleaching out white on the desert between these little bunches of brush that seem to be their own little island. The next morning, at the first light of dawn, I'm up again, and this time I'm going for a hike up on another peak of the Steens Mountains. 1 foot ahead of another, I head up. The first thing I hear is some whistling. I look ahead, and here's an old buck antelope standing there. As I came closer, he kept snorting and whistling at me. He acted like he might like a good fight. He probably was one that was kicked out of the herd there in the rut as well, and he wasn't one bit happy about being by himself here. He followed me along, snorting as I went. After I left him, I thought I'd never see him again, but then on the way back, I hear this whistling and snorting, and I look, and here he is, waiting for me to come back. Then he ran down the road for miles, and I don't know where he ended up. After some rather vigorous climbing, it looks like I'm on top of the world again. Very few human footprints have ever been left up here on top of the Steens Mountains, and you can see the world from here and more peaks on ahead of you out across the Steens Mountains here. Today there's still a little daylight left when I get done climbing my mountain, so we decide to get on the four-wheeler and take to the Alvord Desert again. We go out there to see Frank land sailing. He lives and breathes this stuff, and this little machine that he's made will go 60 miles an hour, whizzing across the desert in a decent wind. Since we're out here, Marge wants to go find some pretty rocks, so she'll drive us out to what was once an old agate mine up on top a hill. So we go down across the end of the desert and dodge sagebrush as we go on a 2-track road. For mile upon mile we go out here. This is about 20 miles out there. We go up on top of the mountain, and here was the old agate mine. Marge picks up some pretty rocks that she wants, dusts off the bag a little, ties them on. Then we decide, hey, we haven't seen any horses. Let's go look some horses up. Here we see some mares and colts. We heard the thunder of hooves first, and we could see these mares and colts running here. We go on over there and look them over, and they're running in their own cloud of dust here as they put mile upon mile between us.
There's horses of a lot of different colors in this herd. The herds vary a lot in color of horses out here.
We lose track of that herd of horses only to find another herd of horses up over the next hill. And this herd of horses had some really pretty colored ones there. There's a horse of every color here. We were even able to see a Pinto mare with a really super pretty Pinto colt running up through the desert, and there was a big herd of them there. There were around 20 head in that herd.
Time was slipping away from us, and we'd been out here much longer than we'd expected. We told Frank we were going out here, but we didn't tell him how long we were going to stay, and we didn't know we'd see such pretty horses to take pictures of. So we were out here a lot longer than Frank had expected, and so when the sun started touching the Steens Mountains, he was ready to come looking for us. But we have lights on our little four-wheeler, and so we were able to make it back just fine. And Frank was still worrying when we got back, but he hadn't got around to go look for us yet, thank goodness. That's kind of the way I operate. I get out there and get to having such a good time that I forget about the time itself. and the sunset was totally incredible. As we leave a cloud of dust across the desert, and this little Honda goes along at a really good clip. So we're heading back now, and we're going to go through some sand dunes now on the way back. And as we go through the sandstones, there he is.
In the twilight, as we were going through this sand dune area, we spot one of the local residents. This is a rattlesnake, one of the western rattlesnakes, but he's making tracks and acting kind of like a sidewinder. But that's just because he's having trouble getting good traction in the sand. Yeah. He was a little bit on the cross side. He seemed to want to do a lot of striking and messing around. Marge kept saying, "Don't get bit by that thing." She says, "I don't know what to do if you get bit." But I didn't. I was careful. Zoom in.
Yeah.
You sure?
Uh-huh.
We lost track of time while we were watching this rattlesnake, and it looks like darkness is already upon us. So we're going to have to head out of here in the dark, but I think I know my way out and can find my way even in the dark. And then we see the Steens Mountain standing tall in the background. They're almost like a lighthouse, guiding the sailors in the darkest of nights. Mile after mile, our well-tuned small gasoline motor pushes us ahead at a good speed. Frank is already worried about us. He thinks maybe we got out there and lost our way back. He's just about ready to come hunting for us. But I told him there's no point in hunting for someone after dark. There wouldn't hardly be a chance of stumbling onto somebody in this vast desert out here at night. But we're doing fine. We're heading on under our own power at a really good pace. Finally, we get down on the desert, and then we can really whiz along. But had we got caught out there after dark and not been able to get back, we'd have just dug a hole and spent the night there till the next morning, because it's a way too far to walk if the machine should break down. Our short trip is coming to an end all too fast. We're all loaded up, and we go down to tell Carl and Whitey goodbye, and that we'll see 'em next time. Whitey has to chase his ball a little bit here, and Carl looks on with great pride. Carl is now 88 years old, and Whitey's about the same in dog years, but they can still play ball with lots of enthusiasm.
Good
That's
dog.
pretty good for an old dog. Girls are getting old.
Good dog. Here. There.
That's a long
Boy.
run.
Come here.
The retriever coming home with the meat.
Good
Come
dog.
on, bring it in here.
Come
He
on.
said, I'll take it and hide it, and you won't be able to pull it with it quick.
Yeah.
Go over there and
Good dog.
get her. We'll lay
gotta
down,
rest.
lay down
She's
on
getting
top.
tired, yeah.
Or says I'm all pooped out.
As we head back, we see the Alvord Ranch is moving cattle. They'll move them up to what'll be their winter range here, and they move them for mile after mile across the desert. The whole family is out there, plus some cowboys and cowgirls they've hired on for the job. Some of the little kids that are bringing up the rear, there were like 5 of them, and some of them were very, very young, but they're going at it with the enthusiasm of a case-hardened cowboy. This cowgirl is riding in about the center of the herd, and she sure looks like she knows what's going on here. She's done this a few times, apparently. Mile after dusty mile, these cows and calves, cows of all different colors, and most of them having baby calves, are moving northward toward the Alvord Ranch, and they'll be there by nightfall. The role of a good cowdog mustn't be overlooked in moving cattle, and also a good pinto horse is good to have. But the important thing is that cowboy setting up astraddle a horse with his bandana to keep the dust down, his